There exists a hierarchy of power that most men never perceive, a ladder ascending through the shadows of human ambition, where each rung demands not merely strength, but a transformation of the mind itself. While the common man believes power resides in titles, wealth, or the loudness of his voice, the truly astute understand that power is first and foremost an intelligence, a cultivated awareness that separates the prince from the pauper, the strategist from the fool. What if everything you believed about influence, control, and command was merely the surface of a deeper truth, one that the great minds of history have guarded with deliberate silence? The question is not whether you desire power, for all creatures seek their advantage, but whether you possess the intelligence to recognize it, grasp it, and wield it without destroying yourself in the process. Consider for a moment the men who have shaped nations, toppled kingdoms, and redirected the course of human events through sheer force of strategic brilliance. These individuals did not stumble upon their positions through fortune alone, nor did they rely solely upon brute force or inherited privilege. They ascended through levels of understanding that remain invisible to those who have not trained their perception to see beyond the obvious. The masses observe the outcome and call it luck or destiny, but the initiated recognize a pattern, a progression of intelligence that can be studied, understood, and ultimately mastered. This is not mysticism or philosophical abstraction. This is the practical science of power, as it has been practiced in the courts of Florence, the Senate of Rome, and every arena where human wills collide and compete for supremacy. The tragedy of the modern age is that men have forgotten the art of power intelligence, mistaking mere information for wisdom and confusing knowledge with strategic acumen. They collect facts as a miser hoards coins, yet remain impoverished in their ability to translate understanding into action, perception into position, insight into influence. The contemporary mind has been dulled by comfort, seduced by the illusion that power is somehow distasteful, or that ambition itself is a vice to be suppressed rather than a force to be channeled. This moral cowardice leaves men vulnerable, perpetually manipulated by those who have not abandoned the ancient arts, who understand that reality is governed not by the ideals we pretend to honor, but by the forces we are too timid to acknowledge. What lies before you now is not a mere tutorial in manipulation or a shallow guide to social climbing, but rather an initiation into the 7 distinct levels through which power intelligence evolves. Each level represents a fundamental shift in perception, a reorganization of how you interpret human behavior, assess situations, and position yourself within the eternal game of influence and counter-influence. To ascend from one level to the next requires more than intellectual comprehension. It demands a willingness to see the world as it truly operates, rather than as we wish it would operate. To accept that the principles governing human affairs have remained consistent across centuries, despite the changing costumes of civilization. The weak will find excuses to reject these truths. The strong will recognize them as tools, and the wise will understand them as mirrors reflecting their own nature back to themselves. By the conclusion of this exploration, you will possess a framework for understanding not only the behavior of others, but the architecture of your own ambitions and limitations. You will recognize which level currently contains your consciousness, and more importantly, which levels remain unconquered territories of your potential development. The choice to ascend or to remain comfortable in ignorance belongs to you alone. But understand this, in the realm of power intelligence, there is no neutral ground. Those who refuse to develop their strategic awareness become the instruments of those who do, the pieces rather than the players, the means rather than the masters. The 7 levels await your examination. each one a test of your courage to perceive reality without the comforting filters of naive morality or willful blindness. At the foundation of all power intelligence lies the most primitive yet essential awareness, the instinct for self-preservation refined into conscious strategy. The individual operating at this first level has awakened to a fundamental truth that escapes the truly naive, that the world does not operate according to fairness, justice, or the moral principles proclaimed in public squares. This person has been bruised by reality, perhaps betrayed by trust misplaced, perhaps humiliated by innocence weaponized against them, and from this pain emerges the first glimmer of strategic consciousness. They begin to recognize that self-interest governs human action far more reliably than proclaimed virtues, that the hand extended in friendship may conceal a blade, and that survival itself requires a vigilance that the innocent mistake for paranoia. This level represents the transition from the unconscious victim to the conscious defender, from the person who perpetually wonders why misfortune befalls them, to the individual who begins mapping the patterns of threat and opportunity in their environment. They learn to guard their vulnerabilities, to measure their words, to observe before speaking, and to consider consequences before acting. The intelligence here is reactive rather than proactive, defensive rather than offensive, concerned primarily with protecting what one has rather than acquiring what one desires. Yet this defensive posture, while limited in its scope, establishes the necessary foundation for all higher developments. Without the ability to preserve oneself, no further accumulation of power is possible, for the strategically naive are simply devoured by those who operate at higher levels of awareness. The person at this level begins to develop a dual consciousness, one face turned toward the world and another face turned inward, monitoring their own responses and calculating the safest path through social terrain. They recognize that truth is often dangerous, that honesty can be weaponized against the honest, and that survival sometimes requires the performance of agreement, affection, or allegiance that one does not genuinely feel. This is not yet the sophisticated manipulation of higher levels, but rather the clumsy camouflage of someone learning that transparency is a luxury afforded only to the powerful or the foolish. They become students of human nature through necessity, observing how others have harmed them and developing crude countermeasures against similar future attacks. However, this first level contains a dangerous trap that ensnares many who never progress beyond it. The newly awakened defender, having discovered that the world operates through power rather than principle, often becomes bitter, cynical, and perpetually defensive. They see threats everywhere because they have not yet learned to distinguish between genuine danger and neutral circumstances, between strategic opponents and potential allies. Their intelligence remains crude and undifferentiated, capable of recognizing that they must defend themselves, but incapable of the nuanced perception that would allow them to do so efficiently. They exhaust themselves in constant vigilance, trusting no one and thereby isolating themselves from the very networks and alliances that higher levels of power intelligence require. The individual trapped at this level lives in a state of chronic anxiety, forever preparing for attacks that may never materialize, while simultaneously missing opportunities that require a calculated risk of vulnerability. They have learned enough to be dangerous to themselves, aware that they must strategize, but lacking the sophistication to strategize effectively. Their relationships become transactional and shallow, governed entirely by immediate self-interest, without the deeper understanding that sometimes apparent generosity serves long-term positioning. They cannot yet conceive of strategic vulnerability, of deliberately appearing weak to test others or to lull opponents into complacency, because their intelligence remains entirely focused on immediate threat avoidance. The transition beyond this first level requires a paradoxical insight. that true self-preservation eventually demands more than mere defense. The person must recognize that perpetual reaction to external circumstances leaves them powerless, forever responding to initiatives taken by others rather than shaping circumstances according to their own design. This realization plants the seed for the second level of intelligence, but many never make this leap. They remain indefinitely in the first level, marginally more aware than the completely naive, but fundamentally still victims of a world they observe but do not truly influence. Their power intelligence has awakened but remains stunted, capable of recognizing the game being played around them, but incapable of playing it with any sophistication or long-term vision. The tragedy of the first level is that it feels like enlightenment to those experiencing it. Having discovered that the world does not operate as they were told it should, they believe they have pierced the ultimate veil, that their bitter realism represents the deepest truth. They do not yet understand that recognizing the game exists is merely the entry fee for playing, that their defensive awareness, while necessary, is only the most primitive form of power intelligence. The truly strategic mind recognizes this level as infancy, a necessary stage, but one to be transcended as quickly as possible. For those who remain here are perpetually exploited by those who have climbed higher up the ladder of awareness and capability. The second level of power intelligence emerges when the individual moves beyond reactive self-preservation and begins actively studying the repeating patterns that govern human interaction and social dynamics. This person has transcended the anxious vigilance of the first level and developed a more sophisticated observation. They recognize that human behavior, despite its apparent complexity, follows predictable patterns rooted in consistent motivations. They begin cataloging these patterns, noting how specific types of personalities respond to particular situations, how power structures naturally form within groups, and how the same dramas replay themselves across different contexts with only superficial variations in the actors and settings involved. At this level, the strategist becomes a collector of behavioral templates, recognizing that the courtier who flatters his prince today employs the same techniques used by ambitious men throughout history, that the colleague who undermines through subtle insinuation follows a script as old as organized society itself. They observe how fear manifests in aggression, how insecurity drives certain forms of arrogance, how wounded pride seeks outlets through indirect revenge. This recognition of patterns transforms their understanding from a collection of isolated incidents into a coherent system. They begin to see the underlying mechanics that generate surface behaviors. The world becomes more predictable and therefore more navigable because they understand the programming that drives most human action. The power of pattern recognition lies in its predictive capability, where the first-level intelligence can only react to what has already occurred. The second-level intelligence begins anticipating what will occur based on recognized patterns. They observe the early signs of betrayal before the betrayal materializes. They recognize the trajectory of a relationship before it reaches its inevitable conclusion. They sense the instability in a power structure before it collapses. This foresight provides enormous strategic advantage, allowing them to position themselves favorably in advance of events, rather than scrambling to respond after circumstances have already shifted. They are no longer perpetually surprised by human behavior because they have decoded the repetitive nature of human motivation and response. However, pattern recognition at this level remains largely observational rather than actively manipulative. The individual can predict behavior and adjust their own actions accordingly, but they have not yet learned to deliberately trigger specific patterns in others to serve their strategic purposes. They are sophisticated observers who use their knowledge primarily for better defense and opportunistic advancement, but they lack the proactive manipulation that characterizes higher levels of intelligence. They navigate the existing currents skillfully, but do not yet create currents of their own. Their power lies in adaptation rather than control, in avoiding pitfalls and seizing opportunities rather than constructing the very terrain upon which the game is played. The second-level strategist often becomes fascinated by their own growing knowledge, sometimes to the point of intellectual vanity. They pride themselves on understanding human nature, on predicting outcomes that surprise others, on seeing through the performances that deceive less observant minds. This pride, while understandable, represents a danger because it can create the illusion of mastery when in fact they remain students rather than masters. They understand the patterns but have not yet internalized the crucial insight that understanding patterns is different from controlling them, that prediction is not the same as direction, that seeing the game clearly is not equivalent to winning it. Many plateau at this level, becoming permanent analysts who understand power dynamics intellectually, but never translate that understanding into actual power accumulation. The individual at the second level often struggles with a particular form of frustration. They see the patterns playing out around them. They predict the disasters that will befall those who ignore these patterns. Yet they frequently lack the positional authority or strategic positioning to prevent these outcomes or to capitalize fully on their foresight. They become like the prophet whose warnings are ignored, possessing knowledge that others dismiss until events prove them correct, yet gaining little concrete advantage from being right. This frustration stems from a critical gap in their intelligence. They have learned to read the game, but not yet to play it with the ruthlessness and creativity that actual power requires. Their knowledge remains somewhat academic, impressive in analysis, but limited in application. The transition to the third level requires moving beyond observation and prediction into deliberate intervention and manipulation. The strategist must recognize that the patterns they have so carefully studied can be triggered, amplified, redirected, or disrupted according to strategic necessity. They must overcome any remaining squeamishness about actively manipulating others, understanding that in the realm of power, those who refuse to shape human behavior according to their interests will inevitably be shaped by those who harbor no such reservations. This leap from passive understanding to active orchestration separates the scholar of power from the practitioner of power, the observer from the operator, the one who knows from the one who does. Upon ascending to the third level, power intelligence transforms from observational to operational, from diagnostic to prescriptive, from understanding patterns to actively orchestrating them. The strategist at this level has internalized a crucial revelation that human beings are not merely predictable but malleable, that the same patterns which allow prediction also provide the leverage points for manipulation. They begin to experiment with deliberately triggering specific responses in others, testing which words, gestures, or situations reliably produce desired reactions. This is the level where theory becomes practice, where knowledge transforms into capability, where the student of power becomes an apprentice practitioner. The third-level operator learns to manage perception systematically, understanding that how others perceive them often matters more than who they actually are. They craft personas adapted to different audiences and contexts, presenting the face that will generate the response they require in each situation. To the superior, they appear loyal and capable. To the subordinate, they project authority tempered with accessibility. To the rival, they reveal only strength or weakness, as strategy demands. This is not the desperate camouflage of the first level, anxiously hiding vulnerability, but rather the deliberate performance of the skilled actor who knows that all social interaction is theater and that the most powerful choose their roles rather than having roles imposed upon them. They understand that authenticity, while morally appealing, is strategically irrelevant in most contexts where power is contested. At this level, the strategist begins utilizing emotional leverage consciously and systematically. They recognize that logic rarely governs human decision-making, despite pretensions otherwise, that emotion, pride, fear, desire, and insecurity drive the vast majority of choices people make. They learn to identify what each person wants most desperately, what they fear most intensely, what wound remains unhealed in their psyche, and they position their proposals, requests, or manipulations to align with these emotional realities. They do not waste time constructing perfectly logical arguments for those governed by emotion, nor do they make emotional appeals to the rare individuals who actually operate through systematic rationality. They match their approach to the psychological reality of their target rather than to some abstract standard of proper persuasion. The third-level intelligence also encompasses the strategic use of favors, obligations, and reciprocity. The operator understands that doing someone a favor creates a psychological debt, that helping someone when they are vulnerable establishes a bond of loyalty that can be activated later, that positioning oneself as indispensable gradually transfers power from those who depend on you to yourself. They offer assistance not from generosity, but from calculation, investing in relationships that promise future returns, while avoiding entanglements with those who cannot or will not reciprocate. They keep mental accounts of who owes them what, not necessarily to extract immediate repayment, but to maintain a network of leverage that can be activated when circumstances require it. Every interaction becomes a potential investment in future influence. However, the third-level practitioner often falls into a characteristic error. They become so enamored with their growing ability to influence others that they overestimate their control and underestimate the intelligence of those they seek to manipulate. They begin to view people as simple mechanisms, pressing buttons and expecting reliable outputs, forgetting that some individuals operate at the same level of awareness they do, or even higher. This arrogance makes them vulnerable to counter-manipulation, to having their own techniques reflected back upon them by more sophisticated operators. They succeed, often enough, against those at lower levels of intelligence to develop a false confidence, believing they have mastered power when in fact they have merely grasped its more obvious applications. The strategist at this level also tends to accumulate enemies without fully recognizing the long-term danger this represents. Each manipulation, each deception, each strategic betrayal creates individuals who understand they have been used and who may harbor resentment even if they continue to cooperate superficially. The third-level operator often lacks the sophistication to distinguish between expedient short-term gains and the cumulative long-term cost of a damaged reputation or a growing network of people who wish them ill. They win individual battles while slowly poisoning the terrain for future conflicts, creating the conditions for an eventual reckoning they do not yet have the foresight to anticipate or the wisdom to prevent. The transition to the fourth level requires a humbling recognition that manipulation, while powerful, represents only an intermediate stage of power intelligence. The operator must discover that the most sophisticated forms of influence do not feel like manipulation to those being influenced. That visible control paradoxically indicates incomplete control, that the highest expressions of power operate through systems and structures rather than through constant active intervention. This realization often comes through failure, through encountering someone who sees through their techniques, through experiencing the limits of direct manipulation when dealing with genuinely sophisticated opponents, or through the exhaustion of constantly needing to actively manage every relationship and situation through personal effort. The fourth level marks a fundamental evolution in power intelligence. The shift from individual manipulation to systemic positioning, from direct control to structural advantage. The strategist ascending to this level recognizes a profound limitation in third-level operations, that actively manipulating each person and situation requires enormous ongoing effort, creates constant risk of exposure, and cannot scale beyond the immediate sphere of personal interaction. They discover that true power flows not from manipulating individuals, but from positioning oneself within systems, networks, and structures such that advantage accrues naturally without constant active intervention. The question transforms from how do I make this person do what I want to? How do I structure circumstances such that people naturally act in ways that serve my interests? At this level, the operator begins thinking in terms of positions rather than actions, understanding that the right structural position generates power automatically, while the wrong position requires exhausting effort to achieve even modest results. They recognize that the advisor to the king often wields more practical power than ministers with grander titles because information flows through them. Decisions are filtered through their counsel, and proximity to ultimate authority translates into subtle but profound influence. They seek positions that appear modest but provide asymmetric access to resources, information, or decision makers. They understand that visibility is not equivalent to power, and that the most dangerous operators often cultivate the appearance of being merely competent functionaries, while structurally positioning themselves as indispensable nodes in critical networks. The fourth-level strategist becomes a student of organizational dynamics, recognizing that institutions, corporations, governments, and social networks all operate according to predictable structural patterns. They identify where actual decision-making occurs versus where formal authority nominally resides, recognizing that these locations often diverge significantly. They map informal power networks, understanding that who trusts whom, who owes favors to whom, and who controls access to key resources matters far more than official organizational charts. They position themselves at the intersection of critical information flows, becoming the person through whom important communications must pass, thereby gaining knowledge and influence that formal authority alone could never provide. This level of intelligence also encompasses the strategic cultivation of indispensability. Rather than making themselves visibly powerful, which invites challenge and creates enemies, they make themselves subtly necessary. They develop expertise that others depend upon, but cannot easily replace. They become the keeper of crucial institutional knowledge. They establish themselves as the person who makes things work smoothly, who solves problems that confound others, who knows how to navigate Byzantine systems and bureaucracies. Their power derives not from commanding others, but from being the person others cannot function effectively without. This form of power is remarkably durable because removing them would create immediate painful consequences for those who depend upon their competence and knowledge. The fourth-level operator also masters the art of creating obligation at scale through strategic generosity and problem-solving. Where the third-level practitioner uses favors to obligate specific individuals, the fourth-level strategist creates systems of mutual dependency where many people simultaneously benefit from their presence and effectiveness. They build reputations as people who help others succeed, not from altruism, but because each person they assist becomes part of an expanding network of individuals who owe them goodwill and who will, consciously or unconsciously, reciprocate when opportunities arise. They understand that power accumulated through fear is brittle and constantly challenged, while power accumulated through perceived mutual benefit is resilient and self-reinforcing. However, even this sophisticated level contains limitations that trap those who never transcend it. The fourth level strategist remains dependent on existing systems and structures. However cleverly, they position themselves within those systems. If the organization collapses, if the network dissolves, if the institution transforms radically, their carefully constructed positioning can evaporate. They have learned to navigate and exploit existing power structures, but have not yet developed the capacity to create power structures themselves, to establish the very frameworks within which others will then compete for position. They are masters of the current game, but not yet designers of new games, skilled players, but not yet rule makers. Additionally, the fourth level operator sometimes becomes psychologically imprisoned by their own strategic positioning. Having invested enormous effort into achieving their carefully chosen position, they become risk-averse about any change that might threaten that position. They resist innovations or restructurings that could diminish their advantage, even when such changes might benefit the larger organization or create new opportunities. Their intelligence has made them successful within existing frameworks, but paradoxically, this success makes them conservative, defending the status quo because they have optimized their position within it. They lack the audacity required for the fifth level, the willingness to deliberately disrupt existing systems, even at personal cost, because they perceive opportunities to construct superior arrangements. The transition to the fifth level requires recognizing that the ultimate power lies not in positioning oneself advantageously within existing structures, but in constructing the structures themselves, in becoming the architect rather than merely the occupant of powerful positions. This leap demands vision that extends beyond personal advancement to the creation of systems, frameworks, and institutions that embed one's influence into the very fabric of how organizations or communities operate. It requires moving from the question of where should I position myself within this structure to the question of what structure should I create that will generate the outcomes I desire while simultaneously advancing others who adopt my framework. The fifth level represents the transition from operator to architect, from one who skillfully navigates existing power structures to one who deliberately constructs new frameworks that generate power and influence automatically. The strategist at this level has recognized the ultimate limitation of positional power, that any position within a structure created by others remains vulnerable to the decisions of those who control the structure itself. They understand that the merchant who positions himself cleverly within the existing market remains subject to those who control the rules of the market, that the advisor who gains the prince's ear still serves at the prince's pleasure. True power, they realize, belongs to those who establish the frameworks within which others compete, who define the rules that others must follow, who construct the systems that channel human ambition and effort in directions that serve the architect's ultimate interests. At this level, the strategist begins thinking in terms of institutions, methodologies, standards, and paradigms, rather than merely positions and relationships. They recognize that the person who establishes a new way of doing something, who creates a system that others adopt, who defines the categories through which people understand their reality, exercises a form of power that transcends individual manipulation or structural positioning. The founder of a religion exercises more enduring influence than any priest within that religion. The creator of a political philosophy shapes history more profoundly than politicians who operate within that philosophy. The inventor of a new technology or business model establishes frameworks that generate wealth and power for generations. The fifth level intelligence seeks to operate at this creative, generative level. The framework creator understands that systems, once established and adopted, become self-perpetuating because they create vested interests in their own continuation. People invest time and resources in learning to operate within a particular framework. They build careers and reputations based on competence within that system. They develop psychological attachments to familiar ways of operating. This creates enormous resistance to alternative frameworks and corresponding loyalty to the established system, even when that system primarily benefits its creator. The genius of framework creation lies in designing systems that others willingly adopt because they derive genuine value from them, while simultaneously embedding within those systems structural advantages for the architect that may not be immediately apparent to the users. The fifth-level strategist also recognizes the power of defining language, categories, and metrics. The person who establishes how something is measured controls what people pay attention to and optimize for. Even if they never directly command anyone to do anything, the inventor of a new terminology for understanding a phenomenon shapes how people think about that phenomenon, creating mental categories that then influence perception and decision-making. The designer of evaluation systems determines what is valued and what is ignored, what is rewarded and what is discouraged, exercising profound influence through the architecture of measurement and assessment rather than through direct authority over individuals. This level encompasses the strategic creation of dependencies that extend beyond personal relationships to systemic dependencies. The framework creator designs systems where many people depend on the continued operation and availability of something they control, whether that is a technology, a methodology, a platform, or an institutional structure. This creates a form of power that is remarkably resilient because removing or challenging the creator threatens to disrupt value for a large number of people who have integrated the framework into their own operations. The creator becomes too important to easily displace, not because of personal indispensability, but because they have made their creation indispensable to many. However, the fifth level contains its own characteristic dangers and limitations. Framework creators sometimes become prisoners of their own creations, finding that the systems they established develop momentum and directions that diverge from their original intentions. The framework takes on a life of its own, shaped by the unintended consequences of its design features and by the agendas of others who gain positions of influence within the system. The creator discovers that designing a system is easier than controlling it once it has grown beyond their direct oversight. That frameworks powerful enough to be truly influential are also complex enough to generate emergent properties that no single intelligence can fully predict or direct. Additionally, the fifth-level strategist sometimes falls into the trap of believing that framework creation alone guarantees enduring power. They fail to recognize that all frameworks eventually become obsolete, that competing frameworks constantly emerge, and that maintaining influence requires not merely creating one successful system, but continually evolving, adapting, and when necessary, abandoning old frameworks for new ones. They become defensive of their creation, viewing challenges to it as challenges to themselves, unable to recognize when their framework has served its purpose and should be discarded in favor of superior approaches. Their intelligence created the system, but their ego becomes entangled with it, limiting their ability to think beyond the structure they brought into being. The transition to the sixth level requires developing the detachment to view even one's own creations instrumentally rather than emotionally, to recognize frameworks as tools to be used and discarded rather than monuments to be defended, and to understand that the highest intelligence lies not in creating any particular system, but in developing the capacity to fluidly create, modify, and abandon systems as circumstances evolve. This demands a form of intellectual and emotional flexibility that many who achieve success through framework creation find extraordinarily difficult, requiring them to treat their greatest achievements as merely stepping stones rather than destinations. The sixth level of power intelligence emerges when the strategist transcends attachment to any particular framework, system, or approach, developing instead a fluid, adaptive intelligence that continuously innovates in response to changing circumstances. The operator at this level recognizes that all structures, methodologies, and systems eventually ossify and become liabilities, that the framework that generated power in one era becomes the constraint that limits power in the next era. They cultivate the rare capacity to remain perpetually flexible, willing to abandon approaches that are no longer optimal, regardless of how successful those approaches were previously. This requires overcoming the psychological tendency toward consistency, the comfort of established patterns, and the ego investment in past successes. The sixth-level strategist becomes a master of strategic timing, understanding that power intelligence includes knowing not merely what to do, but when to do it. They recognize that the same action produces radically different results depending on timing, that patience is often more powerful than action, and that the ability to wait for optimal moments while others exhaust themselves through premature or poorly timed initiatives represents a significant competitive advantage. They develop an intuitive sense for the rhythms of situations, recognizing when circumstances are ripe for intervention and when they remain unformed, when to press advantage and when to consolidate, when to reveal strength and when to feign weakness. This temporal dimension of intelligence separates the merely clever from the genuinely masterful. At this level, the operator also develops the capacity to hold contradictory strategies simultaneously, preparing multiple pathways forward and remaining uncommitted until circumstances clarify which approach circumstances favor. Where lower levels of intelligence require certainty and commit fully to a single course of action, the sixth-level strategist maintains strategic ambiguity, keeping options open and adapting fluidly as situations develop. They understand that rigid commitment to a predetermined plan, however brilliant that plan might be, creates vulnerability because reality rarely unfolds exactly as anticipated. Flexibility and the capacity to improvise become more valuable than perfect planning. Adaptation matters more than prediction. The sixth-level intelligence encompasses sophisticated scenario thinking, the ability to imaginatively construct multiple potential futures and to position oneself such that favorable outcomes in any of these futures becomes possible. They do not merely plan for the most likely outcome, but prepare for a range of possibilities, including low probability but high impact scenarios that others dismiss as unlikely. This comprehensive preparation means they are rarely genuinely surprised by events and almost never left without viable responses when circumstances shift unexpectedly. Their contingency planning operates at a level of depth and sophistication that makes them appear prescient to those operating at lower levels of intelligence, who witness them responding effectively to situations that caught everyone else unprepared. The strategist at this level also masters the art of calculated transparency, understanding that appearing predictable can be as strategically valuable as maintaining mystery, depending on circumstances and objectives. They recognize that sometimes the greatest power move is to clearly communicate intentions, to establish reputations for keeping specific types of commitments, to become known for particular patterns of behavior. This predictability can be weaponized because it creates expectations in others that can then be exploited through rare deviations from pattern, or because it establishes frameworks of trust that enable cooperation that would otherwise be impossible. or because it forces opponents to respond to declared intentions rather than allowing them to exploit uncertainty. However, even this advanced level of intelligence contains a limitation that prevents it from representing the ultimate development of power awareness. The sixth-level strategist, for all their flexibility and adaptive capacity, remains fundamentally reactive to external circumstances. They respond brilliantly to whatever reality presents. They adapt masterfully to changing conditions. They improvise effectively when plans prove inadequate, but they are still operating within a paradigm where power means responding optimally to a world that exists independent of their will. They have mastered adaptation, but have not yet grasped that the ultimate intelligence transcends adaptation by learning to shape the reality to which others must then adapt, to influence not merely how the game is played, but the fundamental conditions under which the game occurs. The transition to the seventh and final level requires a realization so profound that many who reach the sixth level never achieve it. The strategist must recognize that the ultimate expression of power intelligence is not adapting to reality, but selectively determining which aspects of reality to accept as given and which aspects can be fundamentally altered through vision, will, and sustained strategic effort. This demands distinguishing between the truly immutable constraints of existence and the apparent constraints that are merely widespread assumptions, collective beliefs, or established conventions that feel permanent only because challenging them requires a level of audacity that most intelligences cannot conceive, or a scope of vision that extends beyond any individual lifetime. The seventh level represents the apex of power intelligence, a mode of operation so rare and demanding that few minds in any generation fully achieve it. At this ultimate level, the strategist has transcended even adaptive mastery to embrace a form of intelligence that actively participates in constructing the reality within which all other levels operate. This is not the delusional belief that one can ignore physical constraints or objective limits, but rather the recognition that much of what humans experience as fixed reality is actually collective agreement, shared assumption, and established convention, and that these elements of reality can be deliberately transformed by those with sufficient vision, will, and strategic persistence. The seventh-level operator becomes a force of historical transformation rather than merely a successful player within history. The power of reality construction operates through multiple mechanisms, but central among them is the capacity to shift collective perception and belief. The seventh-level strategist understands that what people believe to be true or possible determines their behavior as reliably as what is actually true or possible, and therefore changing collective belief changes collective reality in practical terms, even if objective circumstances remain constant. They recognize that paradigm shifts, civilizational transformations, and historical turning points occur when someone successfully challenges fundamental assumptions that entire populations had accepted as eternal truths. The abolition of slavery, the recognition of universal human rights, the acceptance of democratic governance, the acknowledgement that the Earth orbits the Sun rather than the reverse. Each of these represents an instance where reality for humans fundamentally changed, because a new framework for understanding existence gained acceptance. The seventh-level intelligence also encompasses what might be termed civilizational entrepreneurship, the capacity to envision and work toward forms of social, political, economic, or cultural organization that do not currently exist, but could exist given sufficient strategic effort over sufficient time. These individuals do not merely position themselves optimally within existing systems or even create new frameworks within the existing paradigm. They attempt to shift the paradigm itself, to establish new categories of possibility, to make thinkable what was previously inconceivable, and to make achievable what was previously dismissed as utopian or impossible. They operate on timescales that extend beyond their own lifetimes, planting seeds whose harvest they may never witness, but whose eventual fruition will reshape the landscape of human possibility. At this level, the strategist recognizes that changing material reality often requires first changing the story humans tell themselves about reality. They become masters of narrative construction at civilizational scale, understanding that whoever controls the dominant narratives through which a culture interprets its experience effectively controls that culture's trajectory, even without holding formal political power. They work to establish new metaphors, new symbols, new mythologies that reframe how people understand their identity, their capabilities, their constraints, and their destinies. This is not manipulation in the crude sense of deceiving people, but rather the construction of conceptual frameworks that enable people to perceive possibilities and opportunities that were invisible within the previous framework. The seventh-level operator also demonstrates profound patience, recognizing that reality construction operates on timescales that dwarf individual ambitions for immediate power or recognition. They are willing to work toward objectives whose completion they may never witness, to plant intellectual and institutional seeds whose growth will span generations, to establish principles and precedents whose full implications will only become apparent long after their own death. This requires a form of ego transcendence rarely achieved. The ability to invest one's life energy into projects whose success cannot enhance one's personal status or comfort, to accept that history may never even record one's contribution to transformations one helped initiate. The seventh-level intelligence serves something larger than personal power, not from altruism, but from the recognition that the most profound forms of influence operate through legacy rather than through immediate domination. However, the seventh level contains the ultimate danger inherent in all-power intelligence, the risk of hubris so profound that it blinds the strategist to their own limitations and to the unintended consequences of their reality construction efforts. Those who attempt to reshape civilizational reality often discover that complex systems respond to intervention in unpredictable ways, that the new paradigm they construct contains flaws and dangers they did not anticipate, that their vision, when realized, produces outcomes significantly divergent from their intentions. The history of revolutionary movements, utopian experiments, and paradigm shifts is littered with cautionary tales of reality constructors whose creations became monsters, whose liberating ideas became new forms of oppression, whose attempts to improve human existence inadvertently generated novel forms of suffering. The seventh-level strategist must therefore couple their ambition to reshape reality with profound humility about the limits of any single intelligence to foresee all consequences of fundamental change. They must balance the audacity required to challenge existing paradigms with the wisdom to recognize that any new paradigm they construct will itself eventually require transcendence by future generations. They must accept that reality construction is not a project that can ever be completed, that each answer generates new questions, that each problem solved creates new problems, and that the process of human development is eternal rather than perfectible. The ultimate intelligence is not believing one has discovered final truth, but rather committing to the perpetual work of expanding human possibility, while remaining aware that such expansion is infinite and that one's own contribution, however significant, remains merely a single step in an endless journey. The seventh level operator recognizes that power, in its highest expression, is not about domination or control, but about expanding the field of human potential, not about defeating opponents, but about transcending the frameworks that create opposition, not about winning games, but about changing the games being played such that more forms of human flourishing become achievable. This does not require abandoning self-interest, for the strategist at this level understands that their own flourishing is ultimately connected to the flourishing of the systems and civilizations within which they exist. It does, however, require expanding the definition of self-interest to include longer timescales and broader scopes than the immediate personal advantage that defines intelligence at lower levels. As you stand now at the conclusion of this exploration, you possess knowledge that most men will traverse entire lifetimes without encountering, a map of the territory through which power intelligence develops from its crudest manifestations to its most sophisticated expressions. These 7 levels are not merely abstract categories for intellectual contemplation, but rather a diagnostic tool for honest self-assessment and a developmental pathway for those courageous enough to acknowledge where they currently reside and ambitious enough to ascend beyond their present limitations. The question that remains is not whether these levels accurately describe the landscape of strategic consciousness. For those who have observed human affairs with clear eyes will recognize the truth of these distinctions, but rather what you will do with this knowledge now that it has been placed before you. Consider for a moment the vast distance between where most humans operate and where they could potentially operate. The tragedy of intelligences trapped at the first or second levels, despite possessing the latent capacity for fourth or fifth level strategic thinking. This gap between actual and potential represents not merely individual failure, but civilizational waste. For how many potential architects of beneficial systems remain permanent defenders? How many potential reality constructors exhaust themselves in petty manipulations? How many minds capable of paradigm-shifting insight never develop beyond pattern recognition because they lack the framework for understanding their own developmental possibilities? The 7 levels you have explored today offer that framework, providing the conceptual structure needed to deliberately pursue strategic development rather than hoping it emerges accidentally through experience. Yet knowledge alone accomplishes nothing. And the greatest danger upon learning these principles is the delusion that understanding them equates to embodying them. You may comprehend intellectually the distinctions between levels without possessing the capabilities those levels represent. You may recognize the limitations of third-level manipulation while remaining trapped at that level in practice. You may admire the audacity of 7th-level reality construction while lacking the courage or vision to attempt it yourself. The transition between levels requires not merely intellectual comprehension, but practical experimentation, uncomfortable growth, repeated failures that gradually forge capabilities that initially exceed your grasp. The path of development is arduous precisely because it demands becoming a different person, rather than simply accumulating new information about the person you already are. The choice before you now divides into 2 fundamental paths, and your selection of which path to follow will determine not merely your personal trajectory, but your relationship to power itself for the remainder of your existence. You can treat this exploration as interesting intellectual content, appreciating the framework while making no substantial changes to how you actually operate in the world, remaining comfortable at whatever level currently contains your consciousness. Or you can accept this as an uncomfortable mirror reflecting your current limitations alongside your unrealized potential, committing to the difficult work of ascending through whatever levels remain unconquered. Understanding that such ascent will require abandoning comfortable patterns, confronting aspects of yourself you would prefer not to acknowledge, and developing capabilities that currently feel foreign or even impossible. One path preserves comfort while guaranteeing stagnation. The other promises growth while demanding discomfort. The final insight worth carrying forward from this examination is that power intelligence, at every level, serves primarily as a tool for achieving objectives rather than as an end in itself. The crucial question is not merely what level of strategic sophistication you develop, but what you choose to do with that sophistication once developed. The same intelligence that enables one person to exploit and manipulate others for narrow, selfish gain enables another to construct systems that expand human flourishing. The same capabilities that allow destructive domination also permit beneficial influence. The same awareness that facilitates cruel manipulation can be channeled toward compassionate guidance. Your character, your values, and your ultimate purposes determine whether your developing power intelligence becomes a force for creation or destruction, whether you use your strategic capabilities to elevate others or to exploit them, whether your legacy will be measured in systems that endure beyond you or in ruins that testify to power pursued for its own sake. If this exploration has resonated with your own experience, if you recognize yourself somewhere within these 7 levels and feel the pull toward development beyond your current position, then demonstrate that recognition through the simple action of engagement. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Share what level you believe currently describes your strategic consciousness and what barriers you perceive to ascending higher. Click that subscribe button not as a mechanical gesture, but as a commitment to continuing this exploration of power, strategy, and the development of sophisticated intelligence. Like this content if it has provided value, and share it with others who possess the intellectual courage to examine these uncomfortable truths about how power actually operates in human affairs. Every action you take to spread this knowledge participates in the collective elevation of strategic consciousness, moving civilization incrementally toward a future where more individuals operate from higher levels of power intelligence and where that intelligence serves broader purposes than mere personal advantage.